Perfect. So thank you for joining me, Dan. We're here to talk about Iran. It's the big story of this week, with things really kicking off all around the world, really. So first of all, let's just get back to basics with what's going on here. So can you just explain to us what's going on with Iran, how it started, and how serious this conflict in the Middle East actually is?
Yeah, well, we're in day six now of this conflict. It has been fairly total, as you alluded to. It's brought in most of the Gulf region. There have been drone strikes, missile strikes galore, attacks on naval vessels, and oil prices have gone up. Energy is under strain. The Strait of Hormuz, which is a vital choke point for oil and gas supplies, is kind of under threat, and currently it's not really clear to what extent that remains a safe passage for oil and gas tankers. The war obviously goes back a very long time. It's been brewing for most of my entire lifetime and beyond, actually. I think in terms of the more sort of recent reasons this is happening, obviously last year there was a conflict between Israel and Iran, the 12-day war, and the US was involved in that towards the end militarily in bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. According to Donald Trump, they had completely obliterated them. Uh, and obviously, they've come back now for a sort of second bite at the cherry. Now, the Americans have tried to claim that there was some sort of threat from Iran that justified this war. I think the more rational analysis is that they had weakened Iran so much last year that they thought this was a good time to come back and finish the job. So I think that's the other major critical factor in why this is happening is obviously the Israeli government's policies. They have wanted to fight Iran for a long time. They have been trying to persuade the US to back them in doing so for a long time. And Benjamin Netanyahu has finally got his way with Donald Trump. He says that no other president would ever have done this. And he's probably right. Most other US presidents wouldn't have been so stupid.
Yeah, fair enough. Not mincing your words, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah, no, it's fine. So obviously this has been going on, as you say. It's we're on day six of this now. The UK are involved in this. Obviously, British politicians very much involved in this, particularly Keir Starmer, in terms of how involved the United Kingdom are. So, what have you made of Keir Starmer's handling of it? What are the big decisions that he's made over these last 6 days, and what does that sort of mean for the country?
Yeah, it's a thorny question, really, because the initial response from Keir Starmer was to say that we aren't getting involved in this. Initially, the UK blocked the US from using its military bases in Diego Garcia and another one in England to launch strikes. The UK government has now slightly changed its tune. I don't know if you'd call it a full U turn or a partial U turn, but now that the war has begun and now that Iran is striking the interests of the UK and its Gulf allies, they have now said to the US, you can use these bases, but purely for defensive actions, which seems quite convoluted legalese to me. But I think trying to abide by international law has been a huge part of Keir Starmer's outlook on all this. He is himself a former human rights lawyer. His attorney general, I believe, guided this decision quite a lot. So clearly they've gone through it all legally and said, well, we can back the US up to this point on international law grounds, but we can't get involved in offensive operations. I'm not sure the British public will see much difference between helping the US in defensive actions and helping them in offensive actions. And actually, if you look at polling, I would say bears that out. Around half of people in Britain do not support this conflict, and around half in Britain do not support these bases being used in any capacity, according to a poll that was out this week. And they're quite right to be very, very trepidatious about this war. You asked at the start how serious this conflict is, and it could become incredibly serious the longer it drags on. You're already seeing petrol prices going up in the UK. You're already seeing European gas prices up by 50%. You're seeing oil prices hit $84 a barrel. For Keir Starmer, this is a disaster because he has said this year. Well, he's been saying since he got into power, but not really managing to do it successfully, that he wants to bring the cost of living down for people in Britain. All the talk at the new year was Starmer saying, for the a millionth time, I'm going to reset now, and I'm going to change my priorities and make it about reducing living standards. You can say maybe Keir Starmer hasn't had a particularly easy run so far in office. Maybe a lot of that has been self-inflicted. But the reality now is, just at the time when he was going to try and make serious concrete steps to reduce living standards, remember, all of our energy bills are supposed to be going down in April. But if European gas prices have gone up by 50%, if oil is going up, then something's going to have to give. Maybe that energy price cut will still happen in April. But if this war is still going on through May, June, July, into the summer, that is going to hit consumers in the pocket. That is going to raise energy bills. And it's not just energy bills that might be affected by this, because the international waters this war is sort of revolving around are also key for shipping lots of other things, foods, agricultural goods. All these things have also gone up in the last few years because of Russia's war in Ukraine. But this war could be just as bad in that respect if it drags on for the same length of time that war has. So for Starmer, he's treading a tightrope here. So is a really tight balancing act between trying to not annoy the US too much. Clearly, he's already annoyed them a lot, but actually trying to do what people in Britain want to see, which is A, not get involved in a war that appears to be illegal, and B, try and ease the burden on British households. A war in the Middle East is not going to improve the lot of ordinary working people in this country if it means that prices for everything go through the roof.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would just point out actually on that, looking more long term, if this conflict becomes protracted, you have the slightly bizarre spectacle of Nigel Farage rowing in and saying the UK should be doing more, getting involved in this war, backing Donald Trump to the hilt. And maybe him backing Donald Trump isn't a huge surprise, but for someone whose entire, political campaign is built on stopping illegal migration, as he calls it, stopping the boats, stopping refugees flooding here from the Middle East. If this war goes on, as it seems to be going on for weeks, perhaps months on end, you will get another large wave of refugees coming from Iran, perhaps from Lebanon too. Let's not forget, Iran is a country of 90 million people. Its capital city, Tehran, which is currently being bombed indiscriminately by the US and Israel, has around 9 million people. That's twice the population of Scotland. It's the equivalent of a city like London or New York City being carpet bombed. If we think that's not going to have a huge impact down the line on people fleeing Iran and trying to come to the West, precipitating a whole other refugee crisis, which Nigel Farage claims to want to stop, it's a slightly baffling situation that he is backing this so wholeheartedly. And I think it might be a huge mistake for him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned that Keir Starmer is taking, let's say, a bit of a conservative approach to this. He's been sort of, not being too gung-ho with his approach to wanting to back the US and wanting to get involved in the war. Of course, other political leaders in the UK have been calling for the United Kingdom to take a much more front foot approach. So what's your take on that? What could Keir Starmer be doing that is more offensive? And what are the ramifications for him potentially doing that for us?
Well, it's interesting. There were reports out today. I think it was the front page of the Telegraph. It was an article by Tim Shipman in the Spectator talking about the original UK government decision not to allow the UK to use its bases. According to these reports, and I can't verify that it's definitely true, but Keir Starmer was actually supportive of the US using these bases, and it was in fact other members of his cabinet. One of the names that came up was Ed Miliband, who appeared to oppose this being done, and the result was the kind of the halfway house solution that we've seen. In this, as you mentioned, this kind of conservative approach that Keir Starmer's taken. I did just think it was interesting that Ed Miliband seems to have been involved in this. When he was leader of the opposition in 2013, he famously blocked David Cameron from launching a war against Syria when Assad was still in charge. But to your point about what more could the UK do, obviously, at some point down the line, if this war continues, Keir Starmer may get dragged into it in a more offensive capacity. I think the longer the war goes on with Iran targeting Gulf and Western interests in the Middle East, the bigger the reason might become for the UK to become involved. But as I said, I do think the British public would be against that. I do think it would be a political mistake. You know, the quagmire of Iraq is still in very living memory. I was a teenager when all that happened, and I remember it vividly. So the UK could become more involved. It could become a sort of an active, aggressive actor in this war by launching its own airstrikes, by assisting the US in its offensive operations. Whether or not they will remains to be seen. But I suppose the real danger comes when, as we saw earlier on in the war, a US base was directly attacked in Cyprus. If more actions like that were to happen, you would begin to think that perhaps the UK will intervene in a more direct and offensive way. But I think the other thing to remember is that the armed forces in the UK are not necessarily in a particularly strong state right now. We obviously, the RAF is a very, very good air force, but it's been depleted over the years through cuts. They can assist. UK intelligence is very, very good. That can assist. But, we are not a great power anymore. So the extent to which we can be a major player in this war, I think, is fairly limited. It looks like the US and Iran have that covered. Sorry, the US and Israel have that covered. But I certainly think we could see a sort of a slow drag effect, a slow dragging effect where the UK becomes more and more entwined in the war. But personally, I would argue that's something the Prime Minister should try to avoid.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Donald Trump in this situation. He is the elephant in the room. He's obviously a big player in this situation. It's all been going off really this week with him and Keir Starmer. He came out and said that Keir Starmer was no Winston Churchill. Of course, there's been like you mentioned earlier on about how there's no sort of love lost between the two of them. So first of all, what are Donald Trump's motives in this situation, and what does Keir Starmer need to do to manage this relationship and manage this situation in what is quite a situation that could clearly escalate quite quickly?
Donald Trump is a crude bully. I think in all of this, what has been sort of lost is how sensational and how outrageous it is for a world leader, well, in fact, the key British ally, talking about the leader of Britain in public in such terms. We've become so desensitized to Donald Trump, we've normalized this behavior of his. But for him to drag Keir Starmer in public from the Oval Office, saying he's no Winston Churchill and all the rest of it, diplomatically, it's scandalous. But then we become so used to it that we're not even that surprised anymore. Donald Trump's motives are to try to bully Keir Starmer into bending the knee to him. That's it in a nutshell. He thinks that everybody should do exactly what he says. And obviously, he will have been disappointed that the UK didn't go all in with him on this war. But he's a petty, petty man. I think you've seen that with the way he responded to Spain, obviously another European ally, threatening to cut off all trade with them because he wouldn't go along with an illegal war. I think it's a disgrace.
So from Keir Starmer's point of view, how does he navigate this situation, and what does he need to do next in order to keep the peace as much as possible?
I don't envy him. It's a really, really difficult situation for Keir Starmer. I do think we're reaching a point now where the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer may be reaching a breaking point. I don't think Keir Starmer will ever say that in public. I don't think he would ever respond to Donald Trump in the kind of derogatory personal terms that he has spoken about him. I think, you have to separate the personal relationship between Trump and Starmer from the alliance between the UK and US government, which is very, very deep alliance in terms of security, in terms of defence, in terms of the economy. I do think that alliance will be maintained, but obviously a huge amount of strain is being put on the kind of the diplomatic relations between the two leaders. Keir Starmer, I'm not really sure what the solution for him is. I'm not sure there is an easy solution. You can either try to appease Donald Trump, you can try to stand your ground, or you do a sort of a halfway house, which is what most Western leaders have been doing for a while now. When Donald Trump first came back into office, it was all a little bit pathetic, perhaps, from Western leaders, the way they were trying to ingratiate themselves with him, to flatter him, because, flattery is how you deal with a massive narcissist. But I think you saw when the US was rumbling on about Greenland earlier this year that eventually European leaders, including Keir Starmer, took a bit of a stand and said, you can't do this. And actually, I think by standing up to Trump, they did make a bit of a point that you do not have to just constantly appease this man. You can stand your ground. So I do hope that Keir Starmer continues to stand his ground on this, because, as I said at the start of this, the British public does not support UK involvement in this war. It doesn't support this war full stop. I would argue most of the world doesn't support this war. So the long and short of it is Starmer has to be the Prime Minister of Great Britain. You can't suddenly do a Hugh Grant in Love Actually. But what he can do is continue to try to tread the line between staying an ally of the US, but perhaps a critical friend as well when it's needed.
Absolutely. And just finally, so this may seem like a really big question, I guess, but how do you see this playing out then over the next couple of days and the next coming weeks? Of course, with regards to Donald Trump and Keir Starmer and the UK in particular, in terms of our handling of this situation, what do you see happening over the coming days and weeks, and what are the big decisions that Keir Starmer will have to make during that time?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, there isn't one huge decision that Keir Starmer is going to have to make. A lot of this is now out of his, well, it's entirely out of his hands. This is an American and an Israeli war, and it will end when either Donald Trump feels that he's earned a victory and can bow out. I suspect that, seeing how Donald Trump has behaved on the world stage, whether it's Venezuela, and his general ethos is hit hard, hit fast, and get out. And I think that was his plan with Iran, but I think arguably he's bitten off a little bit more than he could chew right now, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be hard and fast and out at the moment. But the other dimension of this is how much longer Iran can sustain the undeniable damage it's taking. Talking about, I think last thing I saw was there have been 5,000 airstrikes, as I mentioned earlier, on very, very populous cities. The supreme leader was killed on day one. Constant targeted attacks on other political and military leadership in the country. How long can Iran stay whole? How long can Iran stay intact as a regime? Because for Iran, at this point, the only real goal is survival. That's it. There's no other victory other than their regime staying in place. Anything that Donald Trump achieves short of that, they can argue is a victory for them. Donald Trump may just try to get out after saying that he's destroyed Iran's military capabilities and nuclear ambitions and all the rest of it, and maybe that will be enough to end the war. In some ways, that is the best case scenario, that after a couple of weeks, Trump sort of gets bored and decides he's done enough. But the worst case scenario, and this would be a scenario where it would affect the UK, it would affect Keir Starmer, it would affect the entire world, is if this war becomes some kind of months-long, even years-long conflict, putting huge pressure on the global economy. At that point, it doesn't just become how does Keir Starmer respond in a sort of military sense, but it's how does Keir Starmer respond to shore up the economy, to shore up energy. It could have huge ramifications across all areas of government. And already you're seeing, I mean, I was reading a report today about how huge numbers of civil servants in the UK are now being redirected towards looking at this conflict. You know, it's not just the war and peace side. You know, it's energy and the economy, but it's also bringing British nationals home from the Middle East. It's and dealing with any immigration effects. So if this goes on and on, the ramifications of a war on this scale will touch every part of government potentially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, it's absolutely going to be a situation that's going to be watched with real interest over the coming days and weeks. So from your point of view, Dan, obviously you're the man on the ground. Well, I guess the man on the ground in terms of keeping on top of this. So where can viewers keep up with your work and keep up with the latest on what's going on in Iran?
So I'm the chief reporter for the Sunday Mail in Scotland. So in terms of my actual coverage, it comes out on Sundays. But we obviously publish in the Sunday Mail newspaper, which is available in all outlets in Scotland. But we also put all of our stories onto the Daily Record website, and including video, including opinion pieces, including analysis, and including lots and lots of investigative reports. We have been reporting about this conflict, but we also report about everything else going on in Scotland and the UK as well. So do keep up to date with what we're doing.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Dan, for your time. And we'll get you back on the channel, I'm sure, very soon to see what's going on with Iran next time around. So thank you very much.